What's up, guys? Brian Grossman here with Grossman Woodworking and DIY. And on today's video, we're going to be turning some of these old deck boards that my son removed from a deck in their backyard into this cool patio cooler. And this thing is a fully functioning cooler. It has an old Igloo cooler of mine mounted on the inside here. It has some nice accents like the handle and the hinges, the bottle opener, and even a brass spigot over on the other side where you can drain the excess water off of the cooler. So a really cool build. You'll definitely impress your friends and family with this one, and it's pretty dang simple to put together. So I'm going to walk you through the process step by step today. And regardless of whether you have deck boards, you can make this out of a lot of different things. 2-bys, 1-bys, cedar fence pickets. I've seen a lot of different builds similar to this. So this video should get you started regardless of which materials you choose to use. And one more thing before we jump into the build, I always forget to mention, I do have an account over at Patreon. So if you feel like you're getting any value out of my videos, out of these builds, anything like that, and you'd like to contribute to the channel, you can do so over at patreon.com. Just look up Grossman Woodworking. I don't think you'll have any problem at all finding it, but I appreciate any support on that end. And with that, guys, let's go ahead and jump into the build.
All right, so I start this project by taking outside measurements of my cooler just to get an idea of how big the surrounding box needs to be. Then with those measurements in mind, I head over to the miter saw to start cutting out the boards that will serve as that box. Once I have those boards all cut to length, it's over to the table saw where I take the 5.5 inch wide boards and trim off about 1/4 each on each side to bring them down to 5 inches total. And I did that because I prefer them to have nice square edges. If you use deck boards on your build and you want to leave that rounded edge look, you could certainly do that. I just decided to rip these so they'd be nice and square. Once I have all the boards ripped down to 5 inches, it's over to the new fine by tool planer to plane the 1-inch thick boards down to about 7/8 of an inch. Again, this isn't absolutely necessary, but since I was using these older reclaimed deck boards, I wanted to just clean them up and give them a more like new appearance. I haven't decided at this point if I'm going to stain the end product, so I want the boards to be nice and clean if I do decide to go that route. Then it's just a quick dry fit of the boards to make sure that everything's going to go together correctly. Before we start assembling anything though, it's back over to the miter saw to cut out the legs for the cooler. Then, just like we did the sides, I rip the rounded edges off the boards and then take them over to the planer to get them cleaned up. When that's done, I take those 5-inch boards and rip them in two, with one half being about 3 inches wide and the other half about 2 inches wide. And that way, when you put those legs together in a 90-degree angle, it's going to give the appearance of a 3-inch leg on both sides of the cooler, because that narrower 2-inch leg is going to butt up against the end of the 3-inch leg. So again, no matter which side you're looking at it from, it's going to look like it has about 3-inch wide legs. With the legs and sides all cut and ready now, it's time to start assembling the box. And if you've ever built one of the 3 fence picket planter boxes, I decided to assemble this thing very similar, building the 2 narrow sides of the box first, and then we'll drop in the boards for the longer sides. Only problem here is I'm actually using the long side boards here, and I just realized that I screwed up.
Idiot.
Yeah, idiot. Once I realize my error, I get the correct short side boards and start attaching those 2-inch legs to each side, with the outer edge of the leg flush with the outer edges of the sideboards. You could probably get by fine with gluing and brad nailing these like I do the fence picket planters, but I opted to tack them down with just a few brad nails, and then I flip it over and shoot in 1 1/4 inch screws. And since I'm shooting the screws through those sides into the back of the legs, the screws won't be visible in the finished product. So with that first side assembled, I then get ready to attach the 3-inch wide legs to the outside of those 2-inch legs. But then I quickly realized the only way I can do that without screws showing is by using pocket holes. And I can't install the pocket holes with those sideboards in place. Once again, bonehead move on my part. And this is exactly why I didn't glue anything with the initial build. You got to remember, I didn't have any plans for this build. I'm just kind of winging it as I go. But anyway, I removed the sideboards once again, drill my pocket holes in that 2-inch portion of the leg, and then attach the 2-inch portion to the 3-inch portion. Once I have both of the legs assembled, I can then finally install those sideboards. And since I wasted all that time on the first side, I'm not going to bore you with watching me build the other side. So once both of the narrow sides are built, it's time to start dropping in the longer sideboards to complete the overall box frame. And I did this by shooting 2 screws through each end of each board and into the legs. Again, this secures the boards to the legs while keeping the screw heads hidden from the finished product. Once I fastened all the long boards on one side, I then flipped the box over and did the same exact thing on the opposite side. Again, just making sure everything lines up square and shooting 2 screws through each end of each board into the legs. Once the basic box was complete, I needed to dry fit the actual cooler in to see exactly where the wood bottom needs to be to support the cooler. But before I can fit the cooler down in the box, I have to first break out the handy oscillating tool and cut off those handles that stick out from the sides. So I slide the cooler into place, leaving about 1 inch protruding at the top to account for the trim piece that'll go on near the end of the project. And with the cooler sitting right where I want it, I go ahead and mark along the bottom where my support boards will need to be. Using marks, I then attach support braces on the inside of the long sides of the box to support the bottom boards that we'll install next. Now at this point, I'm just shooting a couple of screws in each one of those supports until I get a few bottom boards in place and confirm that my cooler is going to sit at the perfect height, because you got to make sure that cooler sits just right. So I drop a few bottom boards in, then place the cooler in the box to see if my measurements held true. And then I use 2 scrap boards to simulate the top trim that we'll install later. And if I've measured everything right, the top of the cooler should be perfectly flush with the top of those trim boards. Once I confirm everything's where it needs to be, I finish shooting screws in the support boards and drop my bottom boards into place. While it probably wasn't necessary, I went ahead and shot a screw in each end of each bottom board just to keep them from shifting around any or potentially warping. Before we start work on the lid, I decided to add some decorative boards at the top and bottom of each side of the box. Look, while they're not necessary, I do think they improve the overall look of the cooler. And since I have plenty of deck boards to work with, I go ahead and get those boards cut and planed and start installing them on my box. Now the top boards I can attach by shooting screws in from the inside of the box. That way you don't see those screws on the finished product. But unfortunately, those bottom support boards we just installed are going to prevent me from doing that on the bottom decorative boards. So I had to end up gluing and brad nailing those on the outside of the box. Another lesson learned. I should have attached these side rails before I installed that bottom. But once I have the rails installed on all 4 sides, it's time to move on to the top trim. I cut the boards to have about 3/4 of an inch overhang all the way around. Again, that was just my personal preference after trying a couple different sizes. I did consider mitering the corners, but then decided since the box will be out in the elements, it may be better just to butt the boards up square, which is what I ended up doing. And then even though I had avoided exposed screws up until this point, I decided the best way to mount these was just to screw the trim boards down rather than to glue and brad nail. With that, we're finally ready to move on to the lid. I'll go ahead and get a quick measurement of the Igloo cooler lid and then cut and plane the boards I need to start assembling the sides of my box lid. For whatever reason, I did decide to bevel my lid sides and then connect them using glue and brad nails with the help of my trusty cheap Amazon corner clamps. These things have definitely more than paid for themselves. With the frame of the lid assembled, I then set it over the top of the Igloo cooler lid while the lid is actually sitting on the cooler. That way I know both the cooler lid and the box lid are exactly where I need them to be for the finished product. With those in place, I go ahead and glue that Igloo cooler lid in using liquid nails. While the lids are in the correct position and that glue is drying, I go ahead and attach the lid hinges in place, lining them each up about 3 inches from the outer edges of the lid. Then it's time to attach the handle. I take a quick measurement to the center of the lid, just kind of eyeball the height, and then I drill the 4 holes and attach the handle using the provided screws. We're getting real close on this one now. Next up is the bottle opener, which just attaches with 2 provided screws. I just eyeballed this one, got it kind of center of the board and the height that I thought looked good, and screwed it in. I didn't even bother with pilot holes since this soft pine isn't likely to split, screwing something into the middle of the board like this. With the hardware installed, it's time to finish out that lid now. I had already cut 5 boards earlier to fill the space for the top of that lid. Then did a little math with some help from my phone calculator to see the width I needed to rip each board. Once I had those boards ripped down to size and planed, it's just a matter of getting them glued up and nailed into place. I then hit the lid with my orbital sander just to kind of smooth out and level that top and knock some of the edges off a little bit from that lid. Then last but not least, I needed to install a way to drain the cooler without having to tip the whole thing over. So I started by drilling a hole into the box in line with the cooler's drain plug. Then dropped the cooler into the box. I removed the original drain plug from the cooler, dropped it into the box, and then using some PVC fittings, a piece of PVC pipe, and a brass sillcock valve, I concocted the drain there, put it through the box, mounted it to the cooler, and then shot a couple of screws into the flange of the valve to hold it in place on the box. And guys, with that, we have a nice completed patio cooler.
All right, guys, that wraps up our build on the patio cooler. And man, I am really happy with how this thing turned out. No, it is not perfect, and I've yet to have a build that is, but I'm pretty happy with it, especially considering, that I was able to build it out of old deck boards that my son had pulled out of his backyard. So I think it turned out really nice. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to leave it unfinished like this or whether I might actually use like a cedar tinted stain or something. I'll make that decision down the road. I might even add a shelf on the bottom here. But I'm going to call this one done for now so I can move on to the next one. If you could use a nice cooler on the back patio or deck, man, this is a great, simple build. Like I said, there's a lot of different materials you can build this from. You don't have to have old deck boards. You can buy some 1-bys, some 2-bys, cedar fence pickets, whatever the case may be. You can build it a lot of different ways and kind of tailor it to your own needs. But yeah, I think this one turned out great. I'll be looking forward to putting it over at the house and filling it up with some ice and cold beverages and putting this thing to use. But hey guys, as always, if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and little notification bell. Help me grow this channel to 10,000 subscribers and beyond. And I guess with that, I'll see you guys on the next one.